Dear reader, perhaps if you've taken an interest in my stories, you have a slight interest into the occult and esoteric arts as well. Perhaps at least a little fascination with history, maybe mythology, maybe religion, maybe theology. I mean to infer that a number of you might just have a slight idea of what I'm about to write of. That is, the Unnamed Pope. You see, dear reader, history has given us villains, traitors, sadists, and corrupt folks, no doubt. These we do talk about. These we do remember. However, what if I was to tell you there have been among the wicked a few so vile, so malicious, downright Luciferian souls, so much so that the world had rather preferred to pretend they did not so much as exist? Those they do not mention. They do not name. One must be rather passionate, nigh mad enough to find any mentions of them. And I admit myself to be a madman. Should you still want to listen, this is the Unnamed Pope's history and its ritual. This only entitled man of God is said to have lived during the darkest times of the papacy, sometime in the 10th century. He did not sit on the holy chair long. In fact, most popes didn't in his time. The Unnamed is believed to have had less than a week to rule the church. You see, he was a young man, barely 19 at the time of his election. On his first night in the Church of the Lateran, one of the cardinals found the young pope praying. He thought nothing of it at first, and humbly asked the holy man if he'd be allowed to pray by his side. To this, he agreed, and so they recited passages of the Gospel together. "Father," said the young pope at some point, interrupting the prayer, "when you return to your quarters tonight, you will find a dove knocking at your window. It will come and go throughout the night. If you ignore its presence, the knocks will grow louder. In the dead of night, it shall begin speaking to you. It will tell of your damnation and of the torment you shall receive in hell. It will tell you the names of 67 demons and the names of those leading their unholy legions. You must not show fear, Father. To this you shall pray. You must recite Ephesians chapter 1, verse 18, and thy prayer of faith, and then the demons shall flee and leave you in peace." The reader should not be surprised to find that the cardinal could only nod in utter shock, gripped with terror at what the Pope seemed to have predicted for him. He did indeed return to his quarters that night, to find himself haunted by most unholy spirits until dawn. All happened just as the young pope had described. Due to this, it is said that the people of Rome rushed to the Lateran the very next day to praise their holy ruler. Some say they named him Benedictus, the Blessed One, for it seemed God had bestowed upon him the gift of telling the future. Others yet, for the same reason, named him Maledictus, for they believed he had been claimed and cursed by the devil and sent to tempt and to test their church. On the second night, the Pope invoked the Council of Cardinals and instructed them to bring all the virgins in Rome to the Basilica of the Lateran. When the bishops further asked as to why they should do such a thing, the Pope wept. "They will be in great danger tonight," was all that he said. And that was enough to send the cardinals hastening to spread the word. It had been less than 2 hours, they say, before all the virgins were brought into the Lateran, scared and bewildered. The Pope had ordered the cardinals to surround the basilica, to keep folks from entering the building, and to pray ceaselessly until dawn. The cardinals obeyed, and so they spent the night in the cold, baffled, yet reassured that God was on their side. When morning came, one of the bishops shouted from the outside of the door to ask if the women were safe and if they could enter the church. To this, he did not receive an answer. Not a spoken one, at least. A piercing shriek was heard from the crowd which had formed at the gate. The cardinals all gasped and kissed their crosses. Some had been so frightened that they reverted to their pagan customs and spat in their robes, all in an attempt to deliver themselves from evil. From inside the basilica, under the door, a dark, glistening fluid was seeping out, sullying their shoes and robes. It was indeed a puddle of blood, which grew bigger and bigger by the minute. Fearing for the life of His Holiness and those of the virgins, the cardinals broke the massive door and rushed inside the basilica. Upon entering, they all begged the Lord to have mercy on their souls. Some fell to their knees, some ran back out into the crowd and cried that the devil had infiltrated their holy grounds. Some feared that God had abandoned them altogether. For what they found inside their once holy church was a sight worse than the foulest delusions of hell itself. On the walls of the Basilica of the Lateran, dozens of young women hanged with their arms spread out as if crucified. Nothing was holding them up in such a manner, at least nothing they could see. The walls wept with blood, the floor a sea of redness, and in the middle of their church stood a figure painted red and almost irrecognizable. It was their holy Pope. Only, he was not standing on the floor. He was standing on the ceiling. Tell me, cardinals, have you come to make me a martyr? It should not be difficult for our readers to understand that the crowd of both holy and ordinary men fled the scene and did not return for days after witnessing what they had. And when eventually they did their return with a new pope brave enough to face the devil himself, the devil and its blameless victims were nowhere to be found, vanished. In fact, there was almost nothing left to even suggest that such a horrifying scene had ever even unraveled. The blood was gone, and everything looked pristine as it could. Only one thing proved that the story was more than an episode of mass hallucination. The brown, as if burned mark of a pair of feet on the church's ceiling. It is said that later on, magicians and witches worshipped the unnamed Pope and came up with special practices to honor him and asked to be granted powers from beyond. Perhaps you might have heard stories of virgin witches said to have sold their souls to the devil and sealed the contract by copulating with the King of Hell. I cannot help but wonder if the story of the unnamed Pope had something to do with it. What I know is that to this day, if a virgin wishes to be granted the gift of fortune-telling, all she has to do is recite Ephesians 1:18 backwards and leave her window open overnight for the dove to freely come in.